We learned a lot of substantive content today, and we're excited to kind of wrap it up with how do you get it to the students? What is going on in the classroom, at the classroom level, and how can these policies actually have an impact? How does the school board have an impact? So right directly to my left is Daniel Buck. Daniel writes for the Fordham Institute, yes? Thomas B. Fordham Institute. He is known nationally, but we're lucky to have him here in Milwaukee with us. He actually lives nearby. And then at the other side of the stage is Robert Pondiscio, who is with the American Enterprise Institute. And I would encourage you to check out the rest of their information in the program. So my first question is going to be for Robert. There's been a lot of discussion recently about curriculum reform. Both panelists here being some of the most articulate and thoughtful about what curriculum reform is. One of the questions we hear from school board members, I've even heard it today, and from community members, is whether school board members, what kind of authority do they have over the curriculum? So, Robert, you recently wrote in the 74 million about curricular reform as a mechanism to improve academics for students across the nation. What is the role for school boards?
Let me start by correcting the record. There is not a lot of conversation about curriculum reform. If there was, I'd be a very, very happy man. That is something I'm trying to talk into existence, including in places like the 74. And Daniel will appreciate this as well. Those of us who work in the education policy world, who are either teachers or former teachers, I think it's safe to say, are often mystified by how little we talk about, as I put it, what the kids do all day. In other words, everything we talk about at places like AEI and Fordham and think tanks and state legislatures is all the structures around education. So, when I left the classroom and started doing this work, it was a surprise to me how little time we spent talking about curriculum. So from your lips to God's ears, Cory Brewer, I'd love to talk about curriculum reform. Because it needs reforming. Actually, and it starts with curriculum. What exactly is that? But let me not be avoid the question. So yeah, there's a lot of talk about what kids do all day, certainly. Which may or may not, for complicated reasons, meet the test for curriculum. So look, it's a very big question. There's a lot of facets to it, and I've been doing this for nearly 20 years, so I will try to be as brief as possible. From the perspective of school board members, which I gather most of us in this room are, I tried to be one, by the way. I ran and lost last May in my tiny little town in upstate New York. There are many reasons for school boards to be engaged with curriculum, not the least of which is you have authority over it. It is stunning to me how school board members don't understand that they are the decision makers. Cory and I and a colleague of mine at AEI have just been working on a paper that we'll release in a couple of weeks, written for school board members about the intersection between education and the law. And I think I made myself a pest by insisting that we talk about this at some length. And I mean, I'll put this in terms of a quick war story. So when I trained to become a school teacher, there's a gnat buzzing me, excuse me. I was a New York City school teacher for many years. I taught at the lowest performing public school in New York City's lowest performing school district, PS 277 in the Bronx. And when I reflect on my training as a teacher and what I needed to do to become a certified New York State teacher, well, there were all kinds of things that I had to demonstrate in order to get my master's degree, in order to be certified. Stuff that we think is new, but it was happening 20 years ago. I had to demonstrate a disposition to teach for social justice. I had to demonstrate that I was going to be an agent of change. At no point did anybody say to me what in retrospect seems like the most important thing I should have heard, which was, hey, Mr. Pondiscio, you are a public servant. You are a government employee. You are about to be given responsibility or charge over, 2 or 3 dozen of other people's children, who may not, look, think, vote, act like you. You need to be humble about this. And this extends to curriculum, because what I was told was I needed to be the person who was going to engage those kids, to figure out what they needed, unilaterally. In other words, at no point, I'm belaboring the point, was it made clear to me that I was working within a public system. You know, I was judge, jury, and executioner, so to speak, on what kids were going to do all day. So it was news to me when I got further on in my career to learn that based on the law, I was hired speech, as I now understand. In other words, and who hired me? You all did. So when you see these examples of teachers, kind of using their performance, their classrooms and their positions performatively and let me be clear, I'm not a teacher basher. I don't think that we have 3.7 million teachers out there all dying to impose their agendas on kids, but we shouldn't have 3.7 of them. We don't have this conception of ourselves as public servants, as again, hired speech, and as obligated to follow a district scope and sequence, a district curriculum. So the message I would like to, if you take nothing else from what I say, is understand that as school board members, you are the authority in terms of what gets taught. You choose the curriculum. When you are told by your district superintendent or others, oh, we're the experts, we get to decide, know the law. The law says no, they're not. It is your responsibility.
Right. And this morning we even talked about it. They make recommendations, but you have the authority. So Daniel, anything that you can add to that, and also any insights that you can provide for school boards to know that the curriculum that they've chosen to adopt is effective? Is it working for kids?
Having been a teacher, I can tell you it is very easy and sometimes a point of pride for teachers to ignore directives. You often say, what is it? You want to not talk about curriculum purchase, but adoption? What's the other way around? The other way around. Just because you've bought a curriculum does not mean it is going to be implemented in classrooms to fidelity. Many of my colleagues joked about how the curriculum changes every single year, and they've been doing the exact same thing for 40 years straight, which is not necessarily the best thing for students because they might be doing ineffective instruction or using poor curriculum, what have you. It's a tough nut to crack, and I think kind of two of the mechanisms and the tools that we have is, as I think we're going to talk about a little bit later, is doing school tours, walking into a classroom and seeing, is that textbook that we bought sitting up on the shelf, or is it a little bit tattered on a student's desk? Those little cues can tell you, are the materials that have been purchased, are they being used? And the other thing, assessment, everyone loves to hate assessment and standardized tests of any kind. I think they're overdone. If kids are testing 3 times a week and coming to school puking because they're so anxious, okay, we're overdoing it. But at the same time, it's the only accountability measure that we really have. So ensuring that the district has universal tests. All the English 9 teachers have to give the same test on Romeo and Juliet, or have to give the same test. History teachers have to give the same test on the Civil War, the Holocaust, what have you, is one way to ensure the curriculum may not be followed to a T, but at least they're going to then have to read Romeo and Juliet or teach the Civil War or teach the specific content rather than looking at it and being like, I don't want to close the door and do whatever they want.
Can I add on one other point? Yeah. I meant to add this point where I was talking about how you will probably hear from your district administrators and teachers that we're the experts. Okay, I'm going to cold call. Well, I'm not going to cold call. Let's do audience participation. True or false? Raise your hand if you think the following statements are true. All students have different learning styles. Okay? Raise your hand if you believe this statement is true. We shouldn't teach content, we should teach critical thinking and problem solving. Okay, a few less. Raise your hand if this statement is true. Reading comprehension is a skill that you can teach, practice, and master. Okay? True or false, raise your hand if this is true. Some children are right-brained and some children are left-brained. Okay. Ask your staff if they believe those things, because they are all false. All of them are false. There is no scientific basis for any of those statements, but they are among the most commonly held beliefs among experts, among teachers. Okay, there are I could go on and on about so-called neuromyths. Email me and I'll send you stuff to read about this. If you do nothing else, there's a series of podcasts by a woman named Emily Hanford for American Public Media. One was called Hard Words, another called Sold a Story. And she unpacked at enormous length some of the mythology about reading, and it went off like a bomb in our field, because you had teachers in tears saying, I had no idea that I was damaging children. The way that I and millions of us were taught to teach children how to read is almost completely unbacked by research. And who was promoting that research or promoting these methodologies? The experts. Okay, so there is we're having this issue right now at large in America about kind of the crisis of expertise. In no field is that crisis of expertise sort of more in evidence than in teaching and learning.
Let's stay on the topic of reading. I think, well, first of all, I raised my hand for one of those 4 questions, but at least I was in good company. I think they were trick questions. So I want to stay on the science of reading. I think it's an important topic. It could almost be its own session. I'm wondering, Daniel, if you could give us an overview of what the science of reading is and what is meant by 3Qing.
You mentioned Emily Hanford. I have her name written here to make sure. I also mentioned that. If you take nothing else away from this panel, go listen to her podcasts and reporting. She has one article, I believe it's At a Loss for Words. My apologies if that's not the right title, but they ask 2 students, one who went through the 3Qing, whole language, balanced literacy, all different words for kind of this pseudoscientific jargon, incorrect ways to teach children how to read. They ask the student, how do you read? Or if you're uncertain about a word, what do you do? And the student says, I look at the pictures. And then they ask another student who was taught phonics, and the student replies, well, I look at the words. Because one student was taught to read, and the other one was taught functionally to guess at words and how to read. There's a lot of different ways to define the science of reading. Generally, it's considered just this absolute mountain of evidence that phonics is the most effective way to teach children to read. There are kind of a few different ways to define it. There's the simple view of reading, which says there's 2 parts to reading. There's decoding, where kids learn how to sound out words, and then there's language comprehension. You know the grammar, you know the vocab, and you also know a whole lot of stuff. If you're going to read about cricket, you have to know something about the rules of the game, you have to know the players, you have to know the words. If you are going to read about baseball or bridge mechanics, you have to know about that stuff. You have to have a lot of knowledge. Another way that it's kind of defined is that it has 5 elements. Phonemic awareness, which is just you know and can speak and are familiar with the sounds that language have. Phonics, you know that letters connect to those sounds. They're different things. So my daughter can speak. She can start to pick up on rhymes and different sounds. She has phonemic awareness, but she can't read yet because she's 3. I have plans. I'm scheming. There's fluency. Can they read quickly and smoothly? If you are spending so much time sounding out the word fluency, so much of your brain power is being used trying to read that word that you can't actually comprehend what you're reading. So they have to be able to practice it a ton until it's basically muscle memory. Vocabulary, straightforward. And then the final, the 5th of those. So phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocab, comprehension. Again, that comes back to knowing a whole lot about the world.
We're all talking about the science of reading right now. I keep saying if you remember nothing else, I'm going to stop saying that. But this is another key thing for school board members to know, because my guess is you're talking about the science of reading in your districts right now. It is not just phonics. Okay, that's where this is leaving the rails a little bit, where people think the science of reading means do phonics and then my kids can read. So let me tell you a war story. I used to teach, again, at the lowest performing school in the lowest performing district in New York City, PS 277. I taught 5th grade. 16% of the kids had passed the New York State reading and math tests. 1-6, not 60, 16%. That was the 4th grade test, so I assumed in my first year as teaching, I was a mid-career switcher, I was walking in cold. I assumed that 4 out of 5 of my children would not be able to, what Daniel Buck just called correctly, decode, read out loud the words on the page. 5 years teaching in this school, every kid, black and brown, poorest congressional district in the middle, in the country, in the South Bronx. I literally never had one student who could not decode. They could all read. Okay, they had all, some were more fluent than others. He's giving you a good master's class here. But they could all decode. They could all read the words. What reading failure looks like there was the kid who says, well, I read it, but I don't get it. Well, why don't they get it? That has to do with background knowledge, vocabulary, fluency, all these things. So if you have this idea in your head that the science of reading means phonics, and as long as I've got a good phonics program, problem solved, I'll make an offer here if Will wants to follow up. I have a whole hour-long talk that I give about background knowledge and vocabulary that I've done for school boards all across the country. I would be delighted to do it for you over Zoom sometime. You really need to understand that basically reading is, think of it like as a friend of mine used to say, a two-lock box. The first box that needs to be unlocked is decoding. The second box that needs to be unlocked is all of that other stuff, the background knowledge, the vocabulary. I am an unrepentant disciple of a guy named E.D. Hirsch, Jr. of core knowledge fame. He wrote a book that older members may remember called Cultural Literacy. And the reason I became a fan and a disciple of E.D. Hirsch, Jr. is because he was the one guy who described, as if he were in my classroom in the South Bronx, what I saw every day. Kids who could decode but could not comprehend. His work has become my work in a sense, and I would be delighted if there's another opportunity to share some of that work with you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that great overview. I want to mention Wisconsin recently passed an early literacy bill. So here in Wisconsin, districts may not use curricula that uses the 3 cueing, or kind of what Daniel described as the looking at the picture and functionally guessing approach. There's still a lot of moving pieces to this bill. There's going to also be some curricula that will be eligible for reimbursement, something we're following, but I just wanted to make a note of that. And I also want to take a step back to curriculum, specifically curriculum transparency. Robert, you talked about what is meant by curriculum and whether a curriculum transparency policy is being passed in a district or maybe at the state level. Should that make school boards, or not necessarily school boards, but I'm thinking parents in the community, should they feel like, okay, it's posted publicly, we know what is being taught in the classroom?
How many of your districts have curriculum transparency rules in place? Just not that many. Would somebody mind just telling me what that looks like as a practical matter? Please.
So our school board expected transparency to our community and especially our parents. And so we have this page called Canvas in which we have an expectation. So once we got the parameters from the school board, we set administrative rules and guidance to our staff of what that was going to look like for us. So our staff are expected to provide on a weekly basis prior to the week and the week that they're entering in, the resources that they're using, the assignments and tasks and responsibilities, and everything's posted online in advance for parents to be able to view on any given day.
That's what you want to do, okay? Because here's my fear. Cory, I think, was anticipating the answer I was going to give, which was, I fear that a lot of school districts and states pass these curriculum transparency bills that basically require the school districts to say what the adopted curriculum is. Oh, we do core knowledge, language arts. We do wit and wisdom. We do bookworms, whatever. And that's almost useless, because as this gentleman is suggesting, you need a smaller grain size. In other words, and at the risk of wonking out with you, we know from various studies going back decades that the overwhelming majority, and I mean like 98, 90%, 99% of teachers use materials all or in part that they either create or curate on their own. So the adopted curriculum is basically a suggestion, okay? And then teachers, and let me be clear, this is not some nefarious plot. There's lots of good reasons for teachers to do this, to differentiate instruction and whatnot. But if you think you know what's happening in a classroom because you know what curriculum you authorized, I assure you that is not the case. So you really do need a smaller grain size. It has to be, and I love the idea that it sounds like you're having visibility down to the lesson plan, including the materials. Because the other thing that we know is that teachers, who's really deciding what gets in front of kids? It's teachers. And it's not necessarily, in fact, it's usually not from the, I'm writing a big piece about this right now, just about this kind of swap meet, and there's no other way to describe it. There's this kind of, this incredible array of materials out there that, every teacher in America on a Sunday night has the empty plan book by their elbow. What am I going to teach tomorrow? And they're going all over Google and Teachers Pay Teachers and Share My Lesson and these other sites looking for materials. So the fact that they have to disclose the materials is fantastic. Okay, that's exactly what you want to do. But I'm overstating the case, but I can't state it strongly enough. You have to have very, very small grain size in order to really be aware of what's going on and have that. That's what true transparency looks like. It's not, oh, we adopted the curriculum and now I know what it is.
And on that topic, one of the criticisms of a curriculum transparency policy like that is that it is really hard on teachers.
Yes, it is.
So I want to turn to Daniel, both of you really, but start with Daniel. What is your opinion on that?
So long as I don't have to do every single lesson plan at the beginning of the year ahead of time, that's fine. That's a recommendation that I've heard thrown out there. I want every single lesson plan that a teacher is ever going to teach for 180 days by day one, and that's just unworkable. Things change. You have to scoot things around, things back. You have a testing day that you didn't know about, or school's canceled, and you have to adjust. And you might be teaching a book for the first time, and your school doesn't have a good curriculum, and so you are kind of have this cottage industry where you're trying to make it up as you go along. You're pulling materials online and making it up themselves. It's not all in a nefarious plot. It's not like I was a conservative teacher. I was in the classroom. I wasn't in there trying to indoctrinate the children. I wanted to teach them Shakespeare, or To Kill a Mockingbird, or Frederick Douglass's autobiography, whatever it was. But sometimes it was the first year I was teaching it, and the materials that the school actually gave me would have consumed 5.5 class periods. What am I going to do? It takes a lot to design a lesson plan thoughtfully and well, to write questions that actually require deep thought and comprehension of what we're reading, to format them in a way that's not ugly. I know it seems like a petty thing, but it's what we think about when we're teachers. And then I have all of this great lesson planned, and Johnny's tooth falls out and is bleeding all over the classroom, and a bee gets in, and well, there goes the lesson. Things happen, things change. So what I was trying to say is it's not a nefarious plot that teachers are pulling that off of online or making it up as they go along. That's just part of the job. For me, it was sometimes the most fulfilling part of the job. But you were speaking, the superintendent, whose name I'm drawing a blank on, but I have nothing to add to it, to what you said, that materials need to be posted. It could be before or after the fact, within a week. As a teacher, the week after or the week leading up, I know what I'm doing. I know what worksheets I'm going to give out. I know what readings we're going to do. I know what clips from documentaries I'm going to show, or what clips from Shakespeare or To Kill a Mockingbird that we're going to watch. I know these things. I have them in a Google Drive now. I have the links to them all set up. It actually is not that much work for me to Control-C, copy, Control-V, paste, wherever it needs to go. Please do.
The one other point I would like to add, and this gets back to the point I made earlier about nobody ever telling me that, hey, you're a public employee, you're a government actor, you should be, humble. Well, you should also be transparent. The one argument that I find unacceptable, beginning to end, is the idea that I don't want to share my lesson, I don't want to be visible. I mean, to me, if you're creating materials in your role as a government employee, and you are as a public school teacher, well then the taxpayer, not just the parent, all stakeholders deserve to see what they are paying for. To my mind, that's a non-negotiable. And I will also say that's a minority opinion. As you're not going to find a lot of teachers who will nod along with what I just said. We're very proprietary about the things that we create and plan for children, but I don't see any reasonable, lawful excuse why it should not be completely transparent.
Thank you. Yes, I want to stay on the topic of teachers. Now, many people in this room have likely heard about a serious teacher shortage. Now, I'm going to ask this in a very high-level way, but in terms of school boards and supporting teachers, are there one or two things that you would want them to know about how they can support their teachers?
Hold students accountable behaviorally. Next question. Of course you did. I could rant all day about discipline. It's already come up today a little bit, quite a bit, during Rick Eisenberg's talk when he was big brothering up on the screen. There are a handful of nationally or representative national surveys of teachers, and they rank discipline as the #1 stressor of their job. It has overtaken teacher pay. I have asked on social media before to teachers, would you rather have a student discipline policy that is enforced fairly to all students, or take a $20,000 pay raise? And every single one of them, almost, says, I want my life to be manageable. A teacher cannot teach in a classroom if a student is not expected to follow directions. If the adult does not have the authority in that room, then the students can do whatever they want. Somebody else is going to take authority and is not going to be as benign or focused on academics as the teacher's voice will be. Can that be abused? Absolutely. Do we need to hold teachers accountable? Absolutely. If they abuse that authority, should there be consequences for the teachers? Absolutely. But a school cannot function if it is not orderly, if students do not face consequences for misbehaving, if there are not routines and behavioral expectations set up. Last year, I taught at a disorderly school. A third of our staff quit in the middle of the year. Not all at once, they just dropped out. We showed up and the teacher just wasn't there that day. And we had meetings every morning, and we looked around and saw, where'd Buck go? Is Buck here? Oh my gosh, did Buck quit? I didn't quit. I thought about it. A third of them quit, and every single one of them named behavior as the reason that they quit. One of them quit because he was, sick of administration, and it's because he was one of the ones who was fighting and trying to hold students accountable and got sick of that. I could rant about this all day, so I'm just going to give one little plug. Will has a great school board discipline policy that if you want to know what can we do about this, Control-C, Control-V, do what you can to implement their model policy.
Last month I was invited to speak to a school board or to the entire staff of I was invited by the school board to speak to a staff about literacy out in a district in Oregon. And one of the school board members' discipline came up. And one of the school board members described, literally, this was his phrase, he described one of the schools in the district as, quote, a Victorian madhouse. It was that bad. And yes, having been a teacher in a low-performing school, I lived what Daniel Buck just described. Nothing creates more stress than if you've never had the experience, may you never have the experience of a classroom descending into chaos and a kid just saying, Mr. P, do something. and you don't know what to do. Okay, I mean, as a grown man, I've never known panic like that. So yeah, discipline is a serious issue. To make the obvious point, it's gotten worse since COVID. Every data point we have suggests that that is true. So let me not belabor the point on discipline, except to encourage you to take what Daniel Buck said very, very seriously. If you want teachers to stay in the classroom, that's what supporting them looks like. It's ensuring that they can teach. What else would I do? All right, cell phones have got to go. They got to go. And this is not even a discipline thing. This is a student achievement thing. I should have listed on those neuromyths that I embarrassed you all by saying true or false. Okay, another one is you can multitask. You cannot multitask. There's no such thing as multitasking. All you're doing is switching your attention back and forth. The amount of times that when kids have phones in classrooms that they are dividing their attention between the teacher and the cell phone would shock you. It's hundreds of times per hour. No learning can happen in that environment. I think England is getting ahead of us on this. You might want to look at some policies that I think England is even weighing a national cell phone ban, if I'm not mistaken, in schools. We should be, France too, okay. That should be happening. And I'm going to use this opportunity to ride my favorite hobby horse, which is curriculum. I alluded before to the amount of time that teachers spend curating, creating from scratch, culling from various sources. The best data point suggests that it's 12 hours a week that they spend creating or curating their own materials. That's 12 hours a week that they don't get to do what I consider to be the far more important work: mastering your subject, giving feedback, developing relationships with students, et cetera. So I think there's a role for curriculum for school boards and for school districts in providing quality materials to teachers so they can be better at those other things which are intrinsically more satisfying, at least for most of us, than going on Google and Teachers Pay Teachers and looking for stuff to do tomorrow. So I'm sure there are other things, but the other thing too is, and I hope I'm not coming across as a teacher basher, please understand how difficult this job is. What I've said for years about teaching, it is the easiest job in the world to do badly. In other words, at least when I was teaching in New York City, if I wanted to phone it in, I could still be there doing nothing, getting away with it till the sun goes out. It is the hardest job in the world to do well.
There's also a model school board policy released today on cell phones in the classroom. So just wanted to flag that for those of you who might not have seen it in the handbook. Now, I want to give you time before we go to Q&A to tell everyone how they can find your work. But before we get there, I think we have time for one more question. And I kind of want to give you a chance to leave anyone with any defining message or thoughts, or expand upon anything. I know, Robert, we talked a little bit about content in the classroom. And this is a captive audience of other people's children. What kind of authority do school boards have to limit what the teachers are doing in the classroom?
To limit it? Well, I guess it's the other side of the coin. If you have the authority to say, this is the curriculum, this is our scope and sequence, these are the subjects that we expect you to teach in 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade, then that gives you a permission structure when a teacher deviates from that to say, hold on a second, that's not in the district-approved scope and sequence. This is not exactly the question you asked, Cory, but I'll go with it anyway. I always, okay, no secret, I work for the American Enterprise Institute. I'm a conservative, surprise. I push back on my fellow conservatives who will look at libs of TikTok and say, look, this shows that every teacher in America is what you were saying before. They're trying to indoctrinate kids, et cetera. It's like, they're not. That's not the issue. The issue is not that we have 3.7 million teachers using their classrooms performatively to indulge themselves in their political priors and their agendas. The issue is that it shouldn't be so damn easy for them to find an example of it every day, right? That should be rare. If you had this idea, I mean, I make this is my wont to make jokes about this, reminding teachers that you're a public employee. Like, no bus driver ever wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to drive this bus for social justice, Okay, 'cause I live in New York. Like the Upper East Side, they got plenty of transportation. I'm taking this bus to Bed-Stuy in the South Bronx. Cops don't choose the beats they walk. They're assigned to a precinct. But we give teachers tacit permission to do this. And again, you got to be careful because some of this is necessary. You don't want to tell teachers you can't differentiate instruction. Oh, there's an eclipse on Wednesday. Let's stop what we're doing and learn about the eclipse. That's a good thing, right? But the reason that the libs of TikTok is able to find examples of teachers behaving badly every day is because there's a free agent mentality there, where teachers assume that you're entrusting me to make judgment calls on what kids should know, and I'm going to use it. And most teachers use that responsibly, and some don't. Okay, so that's not a direct answer to your question. But to me, I guess it's a culture question. What is the culture of your school district? Do teachers view themselves as free agents and they can indulge themselves? Or do they view themselves as, hey, I'm here to do the people's work, okay? I'm here because we have agreed as a community that this is what a fourth grader needs to know, this is what a fifth grader needs to know, and I have an awesome responsibility to ensure that the kids in front of me get the content that we as a community have all agreed that they need.
I'm going to ask you a very similar question because I think you've written about teachers taking that responsibility seriously. So anything you can add to that?
I'm going to reiterate a point that Robert here has made, that most of the teachers out there, are there some teachers that are using their lectern like a political bully pulpit? Sure, but there's 3.7 million of them. With that large of a demographic, you're going to find crazy people. Statistically speaking, like, some of them also probably hear voices. Like, all right, when I taught, almost every single one of the teachers, and my wife moved around for med school, so I was at 4 schools in 7 years, moving from med school to residency to where we now live when she got a job. And almost every single teacher that I crossed paths with, they just wanted to teach content. They were science nerds who just loved balancing chemistry equations, okay? They were bookworms that wanted to read Victorian novels with 11th graders, and I choose that because I was an English major and I can't make it through a Victorian novel. They were the people who go to Civil War reenactments or take their kids for spring break on tours of the East Coast when the kids just want to go to Florida. They want to teach their content. They don't want to be labored with being mental health professionals to these children. They know they're not qualified for it. They don't want to be cussed out by a student and then have that kid brought back 5 minutes later with a bag of hot Cheetos. And they got a hug in the office. They don't want to be preaching whatever political message is coming down from on high to them. They just want to read books and teach them. Are there some that are out there that are not so? Sure, in both directions. But don't think that the teachers are going to be against you in this. I think if you implement sensible discipline policy, if you give them a good curriculum so they don't have to go home and ignore their family for 2 hours because they're trying to write their questions for that day, if you tell them, you know what, you don't have to manage these children's, volatile hormonal psyches, that's not your job, they're gonna thank you for that because they just want to teach their content already.